Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Afrikan Diaspora Dialogue Podcast. I am your host, T. Jamal, joined by a great panel of guests. From New York, we have Dana.
Hello.
From Trinidad, we have Kezia. And from Glasgow, Scotland, by way of Zimbabwe, we have Tawana. How are you all doing today?
Good.
Yeah, feeling good.
All right, so today we're going to jump into some very interesting topics. So, as you guys know, this is the Afrikan Diaspora Dialogue presented by Afrikan Unity Initiative, as you can see below. And if you're subscribed to this channel, the channel is called Afrikan Unity Initiative. So everything that we talk about is surrounding African unity. And by African unity, spelled with the K, we mean the entire African diaspora. So we want to see unification on the continent as well as in the diaspora. And we are addressing topics that can bring us closer to that and actually wanting to leave these discussions with tangible ways that we can go about doing that, so that it's not just theory, it's not just a lot of talking heads, but we bring Pan-Africanism to life for people, ways that you can get involved in making sure that we see what we can do and how do we fight against a lot of the things that keep us apart from one another. So today's show is about threats to that unity. Like, we know that Pan-Africanism has been studied for many decades at this point, and there have been many books and research papers written about what unification is, how it can look. But we want to make sure that a lot of people, they feel like, oh, that's just a lot of over intellectualizing. That's just what the people in college think about. That's what, a certain sect of people believe is possible. But there's really no proof that this can happen. So Pan-Africanism doesn't resonate with a lot of people because they don't think that it's possible. But, one of the things that I know I'm going to bring up today are a lot of real tangible situations where we've actually seen African unity, cross-diasporic African unity at work, and ways to re-engage in those elements so as to be much stronger in these things today. So I want to go down the list of panelists, and I want you guys to share with me if you are familiar or have you come across any people who are holding on to some of the divisions that exist within the African diaspora. And I'm going to start with Dana and go down to Tawana, and then we'll move our way backwards as we, usually do on the show. So, Dana, do you have any firsthand experience with people like in New York, where you're from, like holding on to some of the divisiveness?
I have people, regular Black folk in my family, and that I know, that are holding on to the divisiveness and the division, and they strongly feel the differences more than the similarities, and they focus on how we aren't the same more than how we should be together. So here in New York, I have dealt with that. But even I have one of my good girlfriends, Margreta. She lives in Minnesota and she's Liberian. She talks about her friends and family, and she has to call them out all the time on their anti-Black, anti-whatever language when they're just speaking casually. So Here in New York, I'm dealing with it, but my homegirl in Minnesota is dealing with it on another context as well. And you have to be willing to call people out, I think, when they're saying things, especially about others in the diaspora, that are divisive to us and to our unity. So, yes, definitely I have.
Yeah. And so I want to piggyback on that. So, and we're talking about what people are doing and kind of keeping alive some of the divisiveness. In a previous episode, we talked about the divisive myths that exist within the diaspora, how the origin of them. So, just to give people context, we were taken from Africa as Black people and we were enslaved. And then those who stayed on the continent were also colonized by Europeans. Through both of those atrocities, we were indoctrinated and pretty much conditioned to believe that what is European or European in origin was superior to what was African. This was able to happen because during enslavement, they took a lot of the experts. They took the highest educated. They took those who were the mentors in agriculture and all of these things, because the Europeans didn't know how to toil the land in the United States or in the Caribbean or in South America. And especially for the case for those Europeans in the United States, they made the mistake of killing off the people who were there to help them survive. So they needed to go back and get some other experts from somewhere else who could help them survive. So, here comes us. And what happened in that manner is when you take all the experts out of a place, there's a brain drain. And we hear about a brain drain going on in Africa now, more on the voluntary sense, where a lot of the youth who are the most educated are looking to leave the continent to go to the United States or to go to Europe with the mindset that it is so much better and greener on the other side. And they are leaving a lot of gaps in information behind on the continent, where now you don't have the inspiration to be living next to the person who is highly educated or the person who is the expert in this or that. And so you look to Europe as if it is the be all end all, this paradise, or the United States, whatever, what have you. But going back to the origins of it, so when you hear Dana talk about negative terminology and rhetoric of Black people talking about other Black people, it didn't come from nowhere, right? It has been ingrained in our language. We're, first of all, not speaking our own language. So we have learned how to speak from our oppressors, whether it is that you were colonized by the French and you live in Guinea or Senegal or Haiti or Martinique, or you were colonized by the English and you live in Jamaica, Trinidad or America, or you were colonized by the Spanish and you live in Peru or Puerto Rico. Your language comes from your oppressor. So a lot of the words that they have in there and a lot of the meanings of the words already are oppressive to you from the beginning. And then you have the little phrases and things that go along with that don't help. And then we have to be educated by them. And we have to trust their education system to give us the knowledge about us to combat their oppression. And, logically, that doesn't even make sense for them to keep their power. So I want to make sure that as we address some of these issues, as we address some of the things that may be our fault in keeping some of these things alive, that we put it in context so that we don't just leave this conversation blaming people. We have empathy for what may have caused that mindset. And that's the only reason I went on that long tirade. But Casey, I want you to kind of answer that same question. Like, do you have any experience of division in the diaspora and people clinging on to that division, and that may be a threat to us moving toward unity? I think you may be muted, Casey.
What about now? Okay.
There you go.
So I definitely have
Yeah, we got you.
been a part or have experienced people not wanting to celebrate differences within the diaspora. And I think that's those areas where we get to celebrate those differences is a great opportunity for us to become united. And I have seen it where a lot of times we are so focused on our own nationalism, whether it be like, I'm Black, I'm African American, or I'm from the Caribbean, or I'm from a specific area in the Caribbean or South America or wherever, or even in Africa, I'm Ghanaian. No, this is an opportunity for us to really say, okay, this is my African sister or brother. Let me support them. And it's not based off of anything that is going to, how can I put this? Basically, the whole point of what I'm trying to say is it's a chance and an opportunity for us to support each other if we look at our differences and celebrate them. And so often we like to say, well, like I'm from a particular area, so I'm just going to, stay within that, and I'm going to eat those foods and drink and not try to express myself or share what I know with my other African brother and sister. And so I'll leave it there for now. But I do want to add something to what you were saying in response to that. A lot of times it's capitalism that really says, oh, what you have isn't good enough. So I'm going to go to, you need to go to Europe or America to get a better life or to have more opportunities. And there are things that are just easier naturally in Europe, in African American, in America. I myself was raised in America for a good period of my life. And I'm proud of being Trinidadian. I'm also proud of being, from the South. I consider myself to be Southern in many ways. So I think that's where capitalism kind of sets in and says, well, you have to make this amount of money. So you can't live in Zimbabwe or Trinidad or, wherever outside of the United States or Europe, because you're not going to get the same opportunities, or you're not going to get the same amount of money, when yet they are able to come to our lands and find the opportunities and the money and whatever. So we just need to look and see, what do we really have? And that is valuable.
No, I completely agree with everything that you just said. So with the situation on making sure that we don't just, like I keep saying, we're not here to, point the finger at people and not understand the reasons behind things that are done. Like that move from and the desire to go to Europe, the desire to come to the United States comes from a real place, real concerns, real need. Because again, it's not unintentional that opportunities don't exist in other places. Coming from an African American who's, I was born and raised here, but have always had the desire to leave the United States and have fortunately had the opportunity to live outside of the States. I've both been able to see the very astute marketing of America, right? America is marketed excellently to the rest of the world and to Americans. It is And the way they do it is they allow us to see little glimpses of outside of America for vacation purposes only, but never to consider ever living in another place, because America is so much better than anywhere else. You know, count your lucky stars. Thank God that you were born here and not in the places where people are starving and the war-torn places. Never letting you know that America is very much responsible for a lot of America, and Europe is responsible for selling weaponry to a lot of these so-called war-torn countries, or very integral in making sure that a lot of these countries stay in debt to the country of America itself, the World Bank, taking out loans that they can't pay back, which we'll talk about, you know, a little bit later. So a lot of these situations are happening very intentionally to keep us in this bind. So yes, the problem is very real. The need to leave your home country to go to another place.
Well, here it is. I think that, you know, as you mentioned, there is a lot of, I would use the word brainwashing. There's a lot of brainwashing and just implementing certain ideals and overstandings. In Jamaica, many years ago, and probably you'll still see some of the older Jamaicans and throughout the Caribbean as well, they don't call Africa the motherland, the mother country. They call Europe the mother country because that's where the queen is, and the queen, you know, exactly, raise your eyebrow. The queen is where, you know, is the one who took over this piece of land and has quote unquote nurtured it, and they look to the queen as the person who is like, oh, hail the queen, you know, Elizabeth. And I'm not here to down the queen. However, the motherland is Africa. And if your language speaks to the motherland being somewhere other than that, then that in itself, you know, there's again that brainwashing, that colonizing, really.
Exactly. And that's what it is, a colonization. So yeah, it's a lot that goes into the conversation. And like I keep saying, I want to bring context to it so that we first have understanding of why these things exist. And because without context, sometimes we can create more division by even bringing the conversation up, and people feel like they're being picked on, or they're being outed in a sense, or being blamed. We're not blaming people, but we are here to hold ourselves accountable to the things that we can control. And I believe that one of the things that I believe unity can do is bring these things to the forefront and say, all right, we've all been psychologically conditioned in a sort, right? So let's come together and see how we can create our own society, our own reality, our own economic structure. Like Marcus Garvey, who was Jamaican, came to the United States and wanted to create a unified experience of economic and commerce. His Black Star Line was created not just to be some type of, you know, travel ship company. He wanted to create direct trade between the continent of Africa and Black America and Black Caribbean, so that we wouldn't have to depend on Europe and the United States to always be in the middle of our commerce, of our economic reality, of creating this ceiling of how high we can go without them. And they accused him of tax fraud, you know, and got him deported. So one of the things that, you know, I see as a threat to unity is us not seeing not knowing every piece of our history, and not knowing all of the elements of the things that have happened in the past. And I'll go a little bit more into detail as I answer this question, but I want to move on to Tawana, who has a very interesting experience because you're in Scotland. And as we talk about every time we speak to one another, I didn't even know Black people lived in Scotland. And so when I met you, I was like, oh, we have to connect because I have to know what's going on there. So in your experience, what are some of the things that you've seen either in Zimbabwe or in your travels where you've seen people holding on to the divisiveness that we are trying to fight against, that we're trying to unify from?
Yeah, wow, thanks so much, guys. You're already feeding so much into my head, everyone's input at this point. I don't want to sound pessimistic on this, but I really want to start by just acknowledging that it is probably harder to unite because of so many factors. So the uniting is harder than the divisions. And that is not a prognosis. It's just a kind of an observation of what the situation is. And there are a few reasons that I have observed that cause this. I think the first one is, I think Keisha, what you're talking about, the kind of the system we're in, the idea of what success means or what making it is. And that is really based on, if you look back to our systems of education, that, when the curriculum was interrupted and we took on the curriculum that was imposed on us, where, schooling was, the model had come from Europe, where the Industrial Revolution was going on. So there was this idea of creating employees. And so if you look at our educational system, this is my passion, guys. So I talk about education a lot because I think so much about education. But yeah, when we are trained more to become employees, and we're trained more to measure and count things than to critically think. And so I think that's where the everything starts. What seems like a universal system, this kind of curriculum that we're all on, it's actually, a lot of scholars are writing about this, that this is an ethnocentric curriculum, that we look all around schools, universities around the world. We are learning mostly the history of Europe. If you look at founding ideas, they usually go only up to the Greek period and not too much further back, and that already sets us up in a kind of a funny place to begin with. And so when you have that, it makes it very difficult so the things that our parents are pushing us, do well in school, study hard, do all this. So our measures of success, an example I can give you on the Zimbabwean context is speaking English with a particular accent is a big social currency. It shows your level in society. It shows what kind of opportunities you are able to get into work-wise and socially. So even small things like that, the things we aspire to. So if you try to have a conversation with your own peers to say, guys, maybe we can adjust some of the things we aspire to, quite often you fall into the minority, because you then seem like you are trying to mute or disrupt other people's progress. And it becomes harder to be heard in conversation. So we have it stacked up against us. And there are so many more examples, the kind of the tribal identities were kind of hardened and sort of weaponized, in that whole process. So we kind of, I guess we kind of lose this idea of, the wisdom about the hand having these 5 fingers that are different sizes, but they belong to the same hand. This is what, we kind of maybe need to try and remember that. But yeah, I think this is what makes uniting harder, because the idea of our ambitions and our kind of striving for better or for success play into that whole unhealthy competition.
Yeah, and anything worth doing is going to be, difficult. One of the things that I say a lot is, we carry a beautiful burden, and it's necessary to see that as a burden and acknowledge that it is something difficult that we are doing. But the beautiful part is also necessary. And I think it becomes a beautiful burden when everybody is carrying their weight, when we are unified and everybody is pulling their part, where it doesn't feel like all of the weight is resting on one individual. And so back to the, examples of unity that I always fall back on is when South Africa was going through apartheid, when African Americans found out the realities of what was going on in South Africa, we did not say, okay, that's bad for them over there, but we're going through our own problems over here. We said, what? They're being mistreated the way we're being mistreated over there. We immediately took on the fight against apartheid at the same time as we were fighting against injustice against African Americans here in the United States. At the same time, without a second thought. And it was like, that's us being oppressed over there, and it's us being oppressed over here. So let's fight together and end it. Let's boycott companies that are let's make sure these countries divest from South Africa. Coca-Cola, you're investing in South Africa. We're not buying any of your products. Whoever else, you're investing in South Africa right now during apartheid, because apartheid was going on for decades, as we all know. But, our brothers and sisters in South Africa, and they were very strategic in what they did. They found people who were able to come over here, and they put themselves in Black communities. They aligned themselves with Black activists, and they let them know, slowly about the realities of what was happening in South Africa. And as we were fighting for the Black Power movement here in the 70s, we started to say, all right, we're standing up for South Africa as well. And it still took another 20 years for apartheid to end. But with our access as African Americans to the American media to hold press conferences, our activists are, more universally known because of our news being broadcast outside of the United States, so on and so forth, using this country's resources to benefit our fight, right, for ourselves. And that's just one case of cross-diasporic unity assisting us all, where we can see beyond our own individual isolation and say, nah, those are my people, and I'm for them. I'm for us, right? And so, just like I mentioned, Marcus Garvey was Jamaican. He could have easily just created the UNIA for Jamaicans only. But he said, I want to see a world where Black people are just as revered and honored as any king and queen in Europe or anywhere else. And, he created branches and chapters all over the world. And based on his coloration, the red, black, and green, it eventually trickled down to inspire the president of Ghana to fight for independence in Ghana, and pretty much cater their flag after what a Jamaican man had thought of many decades before, Kwame Nkrumah was born. this is the possibility. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of the possibility, because the violence and the vitriol against us fighting for ourselves in the 1930s, in the 1820s, in the 1960s, the reality of death was much more real than it is now. Not saying that we aren't at risk, but I'm saying that even a show like this one that we're on right now would be, dangerous, like physically dangerous to your life to even be on here talking about this. I'm gonna walk out of here after we finish recording, and I'm not gonna be looking over my shoulder to be, chased down by the KKK immediately. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying that we're in a place where we don't have to be aware and concerned about certain things, but not to the extent of our ancestors. We've made a lot of progress. So this is the perfect time for us to unify. I'm right now on a YouTube video with my friend from New York, my friend in Trinidad, and my friend in Scotland. And I'm in Atlanta, and we're all talking to each other at the same time. If we don't use this moment to do something positive, we failed our ancestors. You know what I mean? So this is the perfect time to unify. It's not life-threatening to do so. And so we have to make sure that we see what has already transpired in the past, what is possible, and see how much further we can take what they've already outlined for us. How can we take their blueprint and carry it on into the future? Kezia, you wanted to
Yes,
say something?
I wanted to say something because what you said was perfect. I actually was writing down things, my little notes, and said, okay, I'm going to say this next. And you said it before I could even finish saying it. But I'm going to add to it. We're called to more, especially when we have these platforms. Right now, we're in a very unique stage where technology is at the forefront. We're using social media like nobody's business. And influencer culture is real. And so many people want to be an influencer. You could be a beauty influencer, you could be a food influencer, you could be a mommy influencer, you could just be influence people. And we all have that capability. We influence people just by walking down the street. And so we are called to do more with our platform. And if our platform, everybody has an Instagram, everybody has a Facebook page or whatever, whether it be a YouTube channel, like what are you saying? What are you speaking to? Not everyone is going to speak about, well, we need to organize, things like what we're speaking about. But even if you're speaking about food, like, let's dig deeper. Let's learn our history. Let's learn a little bit more so that we can share more about each other's cultures or more about each other's lifestyle. And right now, colonization doesn't look like how it looked 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years ago. Colonization now looks like economic power. And we can very much see that African people have economic power if we utilize it right and if we're aware of how to utilize that magic. But back to the point about influencer culture, like, we just have to say something. We can't just use these platforms for nothing. We must say something of value.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most definitely. I definitely agree with everything that you just said. And I'm always on here, talking about social media and the impact of it. And because I hear so many people, and it's usually older people, and I will count myself in those ranks because I did grow tired of social media for a while. And we talk about the negative aspects of it a lot, right? And we tend to focus on only that. But social media is just a tool. And I always use this example. A hammer is a tool, that is used to build. But if you use it to knock somebody in the back of the head, it can also be used destructively. You know what I mean? So it all depends on how you are using that.
Sorry.
I think Tony cut out.
Oh, I was just sneezing. Sorry.
Sorry about that. I was saying we can use these advances in technology for their actual purpose, or we can, misuse them, just like anything. Like, we're human. So we're capable of doing the most intelligent thing on the planet and being the, most highly educated, logical animal on this planet. But we're also capable of being the most destructive. We are responsible for some of the best inventions and some of the most destructive things. We're responsible for global warming. So as humans, you know what I mean? We have to make that decision, and we have the freedom to do so. But I've had this comment on the screen for a while. And I wanted to just leave it up there for everybody to read. But I want to focus on that last part. As long as we don't fight consistently and together, we will only lose. Right? And I completely agree with that. If we're not fighting together, we're losing. And one of the oldest, most commonly known arts of war is divide and conquer. And, and that just shows you, if your player is good enough, and I use sports analogies all the time. For those of you who don't watch sports, I apologize, but I love sports. So sometimes, like, Michael Vick was my favorite quarterback for my football team. And sometimes the defense knew exactly what Michael Vick was going to do. But he was so good that you can know the play he's running, and he's still going to beat you. Divide and conquer is known by just about everybody. And even though we know the play, it still works because we allow it to work. We allow it to beat us. And we, allow ourselves to be so isolated from one another, to allow them to create divisions against us. And we just hold on to them. Like, Kezia, you mentioned being from Trinidad and being proud of being from the South. When I first met Dana, I met Dana in New York. And all I heard, and Kezia, you can speak to this because we went to high school together. We were engulfed by people moving from New York and the North area to come to the South. And all they did was talk about how great New York was. And we were like, if it was so great, why are you here? Right? Like, why did your parents move y'all here? And so when I met Dana, I just used to make fun of New York all the time. And we used to just joke on each other about where we were from. Mm-hmm. And so, but we did it jokingly. It's so funny because we hold on to those things so tight. You know what I mean? We rep your hood, rep where you from. It's in so many songs. And so, but we cannot allow that. So I love that pride about where you're from. I'm from Zone 3, and everybody who knows me will see in every picture I throw up my neighborhood. Like, I'm from Carver Homes. I'm very proud of it. But I don't allow that to not let me be friends with people from Mechanicsville and Bowen Homes. You know what I mean? Like, we're all Black in Atlanta. You know what I mean? So I love that we are holding on to that feeling of belonging and what we have built since we have been in this Western hemisphere, or holding on to our ethnicity on the continent of Africa. But it shouldn't be so isolationist, so nationalistic that we can't relate or do dealings or socialize with one another. One of the things that you mentioned before, Kezia, and then I want to move on to Dana and then hear from Tawana again on my next question, is that in Atlanta and in a lot of different places, we have Caribbean festivals. We have, Black arts festivals. We have all these different cultural festivals to show different sides of where we come from and show that expression, and for people to celebrate that difference, like you mentioned before, to celebrate Carnival, to celebrate Mardi Gras, to celebrate these things that are culturally significant, and to even be able to educate other people who aren't specifically from that culture, but can find similarities or find interests in it and want to engage. I know a lot of people who leave Atlanta and go to Trinidad for Carnival. I know a lot of people who go from all over the world, to go to Mardi Gras, which is in its origin has a lot of, Black African roots in it. And so these things are important to hold on to, but it shouldn't be a barrier to our unity. Dana, I saw you taking some notes earlier. What were some of the things that you wanted to share or that you were thinking about?
Y'all touched on it, everything. There's nothing new to add at this point. I was initially taking notes on just like, I'm from New York, but I was talking before about how my family is from down south. My mom is from Charleston, South Carolina, and my dad is from a place called Eustis, Florida. And my husband is from Brooklyn, and his mother is born in Brooklyn, and his grandma was basically born in Brooklyn. Like, I don't know a lot of Black people who've been in New York that long. So I was just taking like a note to had mention about y'all teasing about me and New Yorkers, and how, so like, me and Jamal would talk about him being from the South and me being from New York, but to my husband, he's like, you're not a real New Yorker, because, and it's true how strongly you feel that like, we Black, we all just straight, we and him are Black American, but that identity of like, whoa, you claiming New York, you need to chill, like, and I'm just like, I'm born here. And he's like, but your mom and your dad are from here, so you're a Southern New Yorker. I'm a New Yorker. They're different. I'm like, oh, okay. So that's all. I was just making a note about how how strong those identities are, and how people are able to joke on those things, but sometimes people take those things seriously if you are from Jamaica or from a different country. People feel strongly about that, and it's like, you were like, oh, y'all moved to Atlanta, so what's so good about New York then? Like, people have said, like, I've heard people actually get into fights though about, like, people saying, oh, back in Jamaica this and back in Jamaica that, and then another Black person would be like, so if Jamaica's so good, what you move to America for? And it's the tone, it's, I don't know you like that, it's like, whoa, hold up. And so it didn't go the way to all our conversations would go about the differences. And like, I guess you gotta tread lightly when people are repping their identities, because people do feel very strongly, even though we are all four of us are Black, feel very strongly about those identities. So I was just making a little note about that.
Yeah. Nah, I mean, that's serious. And I want to take it, go ahead, Casey.
Oh, I think two things to speak to what she said. I'm glad you went ahead and shared what you were thinking, because it made me think of something else. So there's this meditation that I do. And in that meditation, just for my own wellness, I think about where I am, the physical, like my physical body, and then I take my body and I expand that into fill up the house, that energy space, whatever house or dwelling that I'm in. From there, I expand and fill up the city. From the city, I fill up the the country, and so forth and so forth, and until I reach the entire universe, and then go beyond, Earth. And so in that example of meditation, I feel like our lives as Africans is a meditation, that we are called to say, okay, well, hey, here I am in this location. For instance, for me, I'm here in Trinidad. Here I am in Trinidad, in this particular, because even in Trinidad, there's the East and the West, or, even in Atlanta, there's the, East side and West side, or the South side. So there's always going to be those little things that you're going to rep your city. And it's okay. Like, that's great, because you're an ambassador for your area. But when it goes, like, this is where we need to say, okay, I'm an ambassador, but at the same time, I'm also an African. And so although I'm different in this way, this is what unites me. And these are the things that we can look at to say, again, that celebration of our differences. Also, something else I wanted to mention, rag culture. So yes, it's easy for us to joke and be like, so why you come from New York to come down here? Or why you come from Jamaica to come to the United States? And that rag culture isn't always understood, and we don't always know when that ends and when, like, real beef starts. So
that's it. Yep.
And we see that in so many things. Like, we're so critical of ourselves, and we're so critical. We don't need all that. We got other people to be critical of us.
Right. Yeah. And I wanted to take it to Africa. And there is, and I mentioned it a little bit before, there's this joking, like, I spent a lot of time in Guinea, and I spent some time in Mali and Senegal. But in Guinea, they didn't take it so far as to, like, joke on certain last names. So they have, like, inside jokes in the country on, like, talking about people last name Kamara or people last name Bangura, and the Banguras are better than the Kamaras, and the Silas are better than the Banguras, and it goes back and forth, and they just, they all know that they're joking with each other. And so but to the extent that, when we talked about the colonization of Africa and how the experts and all those things left a brain drain in Africa, and the Europeans were able to come back and kind of convince the Africans that the information that the Europeans were teaching them originated in Europe, when in reality it originated in Africa from the people that they had already taken. The borders in Africa, one of the major threats to our African unity is the continent of Africa itself, and these ethnicities being forced upon each other. So these ethnicities have always existed, but most of them existed within their own kingdoms with their own defined borders. So there weren't, issues of a struggle for power, because I have my land, I have where, my domain is. And then, okay, if I am Manding and you are, Fula, we deal with one another on, like, a daily basis. I know you guys, we speak common, language for commerce, but when we're done with that business, I go back to my land, you go back to yours, we're cool. There's no power struggle there. The Europeans, and if, for those of you who don't know, the Berlin Conference is responsible for not only the colonization of Africa and which country would get what piece of land between France, Portugal, who else was at that meeting? Spain, England, Germany, and whoever the Dutch are. My European geography isn't the best because I really don't care. But they created the borders in Africa. So every country that you see outside of Eritrea and Ethiopia and maybe Egypt was specifically drawn to see which countries would get what piece of land during colonization. They intentionally drew borders that split up certain ethnicities. So, for example, the Yoruba ethnicity, they have they exist within 3 countries. They're in Benin, Togo, and Southern Nigeria. And then they created this new reality of they split up one ethnicity into 3 different countries and then combined other ethnicities, like 48 of them, into this one country. So now what used to be the Yoruba kingdom is now split into 3 different colonies. And then now the Yoruba that are in Nigeria are now housed in the same borders as the Hausa, the Igbo, the Fulani, so on and so forth, so many other, that now, even after they fought against colonization, came into independence, they still respected the borders of the colonizers. But if you think about it, they kind of had to, because they fought for independence from those borders. So every individual colony had to fight independence individually. It wasn't like as soon as Nigeria declared for independence, Ghana did too, or when Ghana did, because Ghana was the first, when Ghana did, it fought for independence against all of the colonies that were held by England. No, Ghana fought for their independence, and then it had to trickle down. So those borders had to be respected, because that was pretty much the arrangement that was made during the fight for independence. But here we are now, like 60 years, 70 years later, and it sounds crazy, right, to say no country in Africa that has its independence is more than 50 something odd years old. So when you think about the development of Africa, these countries have only been so-called sovereign on paper for about 50 years. That's not a very long time. So when you look at it, you can't blame Africa for its underdevelopment. And it wasn't like colonization ended and then the Europeans just let them be and didn't, do any underhanded things, right? We know a lot of things that are still happening. And so I bring that up because one of the biggest threats to our unity is these borders that were created by Europeans that create this tension between the ethnicities that exist within those borders, because they are fighting for power. Because I believe that if a Yoruba is president, then they're not going to look out for the Igbo. I believe if a Susu is president, they're not going to look out for the Malinke, right? So there's a struggle for power within this one so-called national context. When that didn't exist in pre-colonial Africa, yes, there was a war. There's always been war between people. There's going to be some conflict in there, but it wasn't to the extent that it is now, right? To just overall beef just growing and deep-seated kind of hatred. So these are some of the things that we have to think about when we're talking about overall African unity, is the continent itself. And how do we combat? Like, I want to rework these borders. Honestly, I want to, because the diaspora is supposed to be a region of the African Union. And like Tawana is laughing because I understand why he's laughing, because it's easy to say, but it's going to take generations to do. And I understand that. But like I said, it's a beautiful burden. Tawana, I want you to speak a little bit about Zimbabwe and the ethnicity, maybe some of the conflicts that exist there, and how do they play out? And what are some of the ways that we can get beyond that?
Yeah, wow. Just I sort of rewind back to what Dana was talking about. If I guess the importance of humor, and for me particularly the importance of story. So if there are 3 things that can happen. If there are sensitivities between us, we can keep quiet, or we can express them in destructive ways, or we can joke about them. So I guess that's where the humor plays its part. It allows those things to breathe. So we're not sort of stepping around each other and worrying about. So I really like humor for that. It can allow us to overcome some of these sensitivities. But yeah, it's interesting. I think, Jamal, just going back to 1885 Berlin Conference, it's very simple. You know, if people take a map of Africa and just look at the borders themselves, how they look on the map, you will find any number of straight lines, and every river flowing through the continent is a border and along its journey. So yeah, it's interesting how that was carved up. So if you just look physically at the geography, you will see that. And yeah, so for example, for me, from my dad's side, for example, you know, and Ndau speaker. So you've got those Ndau speakers in Zimbabwe, the southeastern part. You've got in Mozambique. You've got in South Africa. But we have taken on a new story that we are Zimbabweans. Of course, we came from it was named Rhodesia, this territory before, and then we renamed it after we gained the so-called independence. But then even though we renamed it, we changed banners, we did all that. In our minds, those old ideas remained, that this kind of line around us is important. So you'll find the nationalism is a big, big problem, because people really hold on to it. And you go somewhere and, you know, this idea of calling someone a foreigner, and there's so many kind of derogatory names for people elsewhere. And the AU itself is struggling to create a travel zone across the continent. There's so many meetings, so much red tape going on till now. I mean, this has been a few years now in the making, because there's so many arguments against this idea of free travel. I think the Seychelles is the only country that allows free travel for all Africans. So you can see other factors are playing into it. And interestingly, you know, the idea of the seeds of distrust that were planted around, you know, because if you look at it in a basic way, you know, the language you speak, the kind of the culture you take on, we need to be careful of how proud we are of that, because it is really an accident of where you're born. What language you speak, it's not something you've achieved in your life for you to say, I'm very proud of this, I'm in Ndau, I'm a this, you know, you were born into it, and, you know, it's by accident, it's by geographical location. So I think something within that needs to be examined. And also an interesting thing just to share as well about sort of this democracy that exported to other contexts from, you know, what are called global North or Western democracies. There are some interesting factors on the ground that can interfere with that process. So, for example, in some countries where the demographic is that certain tribes are very dominant just by numbers. You know, if you have an ethnic group who are like 80% and above, you know, if those ethnic groups take power by that ethnic lines, no matter how many times you repeat your election process, if those tribal factors are in place, you're going to remain in the same hold of power. So those are some hidden kind of, you know, impediments to what is described as, you know, desirable methods of running things. But for me, I want to go back to education and stories. So I think we need to be careful what we say to young people, you know, about what it means to be a certain, you know, ethnicity or speak a certain language or have a certain culture. This is by birth. Someone else is equally, you know, in fertile soil in their own culture, language, whatever it is. And it should be a point of us, you know, cross-fertilizing. I'm from, you know, from my own family, you know, we have the tradition of praise poetry. And praise poetry is a wonderful thing because it allows you to be in the presence of other people's greatness and not feel threatened. So people have praise poetry for their family kind of totem names and everything. And everyone has a turn to, you know, express that and sing the praises of all that. And so this idea of being, we say, being able to celebrate other people's, you know, greatness is a powerful ethic that we must be able. If I see KJ doing something really well, I should be able to stand back and say, wow, KJ, that was amazing. Instead of me feeling like, wow, KJ is doing something, people are liking it. What about me? This what about me mentality is very, very destructive. So there's something about understanding, why do you create a team? A coach, if they go on the field, just talking about sports again, they may not be the best player on that pitch, but they have their role in the team of coaching. The person who's playing defense may not be great in attack, and the person who does the physio when someone is injured, they are not going to put on the uniform and play as well as your quarterback or whatever. But what matters is the strengths, all of those strengths coming together to create this unit. And I can't envy when I'm sick, I have to go to the doctor. I can't then compete to say, I could be a better doctor than that doctor. No. It's not my place, So this kind of accepting what being in a team means. And for us, the kind of wisdom comes from the hunters. When the hunters got together, they had those who could trek, those who knew the lay of the land. They had the medicine people who could treat for minor ailments. They had those who kept the group spiritually, at ease. The forest is a very dangerous and scary place to be. You had the elders who kept things calm. You had those who were faster at running, who were better at using the weapon or whatever. And that unit understood that it's everyone's strength is everyone's strength. Each individual strength. What Dana does well, it strengthens me. Because what she is doing in that corner is strengthening the entire thing. So I have to push my own corner to contribute to that. And that is where we will stand on much more fertile ground. So this kind of, I think this kind of mentality is really important to, bring young people up thinking a bit differently, because we do a lot of, as much as we are fighting external, ideas and everything, our own actions are also playing a big deal. Because young people learn when we're not teaching them. I would argue that young people keep lessons more by observation than what we say by our mouths. So yeah, I really enjoy this platform that you've built, because we can actually, have a bit of an insight into each other's context. I'm here with you, Jamal. You are in Atlanta, and Dana in New York. What sort of a New Yorker would I be, Dana? A Zimbabwean New Yorker, I'd be very low on the list, I think. So yeah, no, thanks, guys. That's
No, so much of what you said was so potent. I wanted to touch on like certain elements of it. So you talked about humor, and humor being an element of us, like, and we were just talking about it, right? But not even like pulling it out from the context of using that as a tool, using humor as a tool to get past some of those uncomfortable situations. But we automatically do that as Black people. Like, one of the ways that we made it through enslavement was jokes. Like, and you see it today, our tendency to make fun of everything. And we can be going through the most traumatic time, and you can take one of our best comedians, and they can take one of the saddest things and make you laugh about it. Yeah. And that's kind of how you put that thing in perspective and kind of live in the reality. That's how we made it through one of the most vicious human atrocities ever done on this planet, right? And so we do the same thing on the continent. We do it in the Caribbean. We do it here in the United States. We do it in South America. And so it's using that humor as a tool, as a way to open the door to have these types of conversations on a regular basis without, because everybody's not going to have the historical context, the academic context, but everybody should be able to have these conversations, right? And be able to at least broach it in a respectful way. And so yeah, there was just so much about what you said that was so potent. The fact that we are stronger together. And you made mention of the five fingers coming together as one hand to make one fist. Booker T. Washington talked about that in a speech that he gave in Atlanta, by the way, shouting out the hometown. But that was, very important to, like, even my way of thinking now, reading that speech, understanding that differences don't mean that you can't be unified, right? Differences actually make that unit stronger, because as you said, when you were on the hunt, you had the people who were the medics, you had the person who was the fastest, you had the person who was the actual attacker, you had the people who were there to keep everybody calm, so that when things got a little scary, nobody freaked out and put everybody in unnecessary danger. You know what I mean? So when we're talking about the African diaspora, African unity, like, there are things that Trinidadians have learned during their time in Trinidad, from the time of enslavement up till now, that they have become experts in. There are things that we can learn from Jamaicans. There are things that we can learn from the African Americans on the West Coast, in the Midwest, in the South, in the North, in the Mid-Atlantic, from Africans across the continent, from those like Tawana who ventured off into Europe. There are things that they have found out. There are elements that they have discovered about us as a people, and how we even adapt to certain places that we can learn from. And these are things that are important when we're talking about unity. Before the show, Dana, and even during the show, Dana made mention of making sure that we don't just kind of overlay people's differences, or making sure that we celebrate those differences. And yes, that I don't think unity exists without us celebrating each other's differences. I think what happens is, when you try to make things a monolith, or you try to force unity, you try to force this idea of a melting pot, it may last for a moment, but it's eventually going to break apart, and people are going to be angry about it. It's going to not only not be sustainable, but it's going to end in conflict, because people feel like, I am being less of me to fit into this. I'm trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. When I want you to be a square, I want you to be a triangle, I want you to be a circle, I want you to be an octagon, and then we can make our own shape out of those different elements, where we see how to benefit one another, where we learn from each other's strengths, we bolster each other's weaknesses, and we carry each other, to success. Like Tawana also said, celebrating each other's successes and not being jealous of one person's skills. How foolish would it be to be jealous of your doctor who's treating you? That is one of the best analogies I've heard in a long time. That's dope. You know what I mean? And so that's also one of the reasons that I have this panel. Like, the Afrikan Diaspora Dialogue can't just be one person talking. We need different perspectives, different brains, different experiences, different expertise. Everybody on here has a different job, has a different, way of looking at the world. The meditation that Kezia brought up of filling up herself then filling up her room, then filling up the house, then filling up the city, then filling up the country, and making yourself present in where you are and expanding yourself beyond just your borders. That goes into what we were just talking about. So we're talking about on a meditational level, on a spiritual level, going beyond your own personal borders outside of your own body. And we were just talking about going beyond our own borders that were created by other people on the continent of Africa, as well as in the diaspora, going beyond those borders and being able to see one another, socialize with one another, do commerce with one another beyond the borders that have been created. So this is where we are. And the last thing I wanted us to talk about while we're on here together. Oh, go ahead, Kezia. Go ahead.
Oh, I think what Tawana said about oh gosh, I just lost my thought. Oh, okay. What he just mentioned, what he just mentioned is really also a message to activists. What we're all talking about is a message to those people who are positioned as activists to remember that, just to put it in a different context, to remember that not everybody is going to be or needs to be on the picket line. Not everybody needs to be like, yo, we got to fight. We got to get. Not everyone is built for that, A, and B, needs to be. You need to have people in different positions and different angles. And if you're out on the picket line, there's also the activist who's in the kitchen, you know, and for me, that stands close to me, that kitchen piece, to kind of touch on something that you said about, in regards to celebrating our differences, is something I've looked into is the migration of food. And so on the continent, I'll use one example. In Ghana, they have a dish called banku. In Trinidad, we have a dish called kuku. It's the same thing, cooked a little differently, but the same thing. And so just that food night migration, and we had mentioned earlier before, in the Caribbean, we have callaloo. In Jamaica, there's callaloo. In Trinidad, there's callaloo. We make it 2 different ways. In the South, I love me some collard greens. You know, so just being able to look at the different aspects, the different roles that we have, and remember that when we're activating as activists, that where we are and what we do is special and important, because the person who's out there, they need to sustain themselves, and I have that to give them. The person who is, you know, maybe hosting speeches and having important messages with important leaders, and they're the more political one, they may not need to be out on the front line because they might get shot. You know, they need to be protected in a different way. So there's just these nuances that we have to remember.
And then I was gonna say as well, there was a saying that I heard once upon a time, and it was saying that you want to be a fruit salad, not a soup, right? Not a melting pot. So in a fruit salad, every fruit holds its identity. You know the orange, you know the banana, you know the peach, you know the grape, you know everything is together in the fruit salad. It's delicious, but each item holds its own identity in that fruit salad, and it's important for that salad. Soup, or the melting pot, where everything blends into one. The beans melt down, and you can't necessarily notice this is a bean anymore. The potatoes melt down, and it turns into thick stock, and it's not necessarily is it a potato anymore. The okra, the whatever in the soup it's turned into a different item, and so it's all a melting pot. Excuse me. And that for a diaspora or for a group, you don't or shouldn't want a melting pot. I know America, that's what they say we supposed to be, but I don't want that, and you shouldn't want that. And for us as a diaspora, we definitely shouldn't want that, because we should want to be a fruit salad, because every individual is necessary and important to make that salad, but we hold our own identity. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. I mean, I definitely agree. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we don't miss out on is, so there, we just wrapped up these presidential elections here in the United States, right? And as those elections as the campaigns started to flow before primary season, as people started to announce their candidacy, a lot of talk about the Black agenda began, right? And it was very necessary. And, you know, making sure that we hold each party accountable to us, to make sure that people respected the Black vote. So much so, you know, a lot of people who understand the United States and know anything about politics from here, Black people have been voting primarily for the Democratic Party since a little bit before Kennedy. And there became a shift around that time, because prior to that, we were voting Republican because of the ties to Abraham Lincoln. But somewhere around the 60s, it kind of switched to the Democratic Party. So, and it may have been a little bit before that, but we've been kind of loyal to the Democratic Party, kind of based off just this grandmother clause, because my parents voted Democratic, so I'm going to vote Democratic, and not really holding them accountable for doing anything specifically for Black people, right? And so a lot of talks around what the Black agenda is became topics of discussion. And one group emerged, and they started to call themselves ADOS. And ADOS stood for American Descendants of Slaves. And so a lot of their rhetoric at the beginning, because I was trying to pay attention, I had an issue with the name, because I'm very high on discourse. And so to say that you're a descendant of slaves means that your ancestors were born slaves, when I believe that we were enslaved, and no one is born a slave. You're indoctrinated into an enslavement mindset, and you're conditioned into being that. My ancestors are African, and they come from, you know, intelligence and being experts in all types of fields, and all the way from just an expert from agriculture to astronomy to royalty. Those are where my ancestors come from. So I don't identify my ancestors as slaves, and my ancestry doesn't start at the enslavement period. So that's just me being, you know, having a problem with the name. But I was like, okay, I'll give them a pass on the name, but let me hear what they're talking about. And then the rhetoric was about, you know, they wanted to demand reparations for enslavement, and of course for the time of Jim Crow and all the things that have happened to Black people in the United States since that time. And, you know, were demanding this Black agenda and wanted to hold the Democratic Party accountable for getting our votes. That part I agree with. What I didn't agree with was then they extended that and started to negatively down talk Black immigrants in the United States, saying that they only wanted the reparations to go to those who were descendants of people who were slaves in the United States. So the logic behind that really didn't make sense to me, because it just felt like they were creating division that was like accenting division that already exists. Like they created another name for African Americans, as if we don't already have something that kind of separates us from those in the diaspora already. And then they started to really talk about who shouldn't get reparations, as if it was something that had already been divvied out. So we're arguing about who's not going to get something that's not even on the table of us getting. And we're creating division, to me, unnecessarily. And it just hit me the wrong way as somebody who is fighting, like scratching for us to identify with one another and be unified. And then we have these people who are coming out to create more division and really on the attack of people, when as if people from the Caribbean or as if people from, the continent of Africa weren't here during Jim Crow or didn't experience some of those things in America or contributed to our fight for freedom. Like, the reason that I brought up the fact that Marcus Garvey was Jamaican earlier was to combat some of the rhetoric from ADOS. The people don't know this, but Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, he's Trinidadian, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's one of the most influential activists of his time. He was the president of SNCC. He led us. He convinced Dr. Martin Luther King to say Black Power in a speech. And he was here in the United States fighting for us all. So this unnecessary division kind of rubbed me the wrong way, and it still does. And even the talk about reparations, like, reparations is very important, but I would rather see talk about reparations where, like we did, like I mentioned in apartheid in South Africa, we didn't say, we're fighting against our oppression here in the United States. So South Africa will deal with your issues once we finish with ours. That's not what we did, though. We said apartheid is an issue. Racism in America is an issue. We're going to fight against both of them concurrently, simultaneously. We can double task. We can chew bubble gum and walk. You know what I mean? So why are we not doing the same thing with reparations, where if I'm fighting for reparations in the United States, that means I'm fighting for reparations in Trinidad, in Jamaica, in Haiti, in Peru, because Spain owes us, France owes us, Germany owes us, the Portuguese owe us, the Great Britain owes us, and a lot of these museums, they still have a lot of African artifacts that they're making money off of in their museums. They still own money printing on the continent of Africa. The CFA is printed in France. France makes money off the CFA, but the CFA cannot be spent in France. These are the topics of reparations, and these are cases that we can bring as a unified diaspora, not just to our individual countries, but to the UN, and make a much stronger case and hold all of these people accountable for the atrocities against Black people. But when we fight against each other on something that's not even on the table, so you got people retreating into their isolation divisions again. So now you got Adolf saying, never mind the Jamaican Americans and the Ghanaian Americans and the Nigerian Americans and so on. So now you got the Jamaican Americans like, okay, so forget y'all too then. So now we just about Jamaica. Oh, now we just about Nigeria. So it just creates these factions of division and isolation that aren't very productive. Aren't productive at all. So I want to just present it to the panel. Like, have you heard of that faction? Like, are you familiar with ADOS? And if you are, what are your thoughts on some of their rhetoric? And even if you aren't, just based on, some of the video things that I've sent out to people and some of the, rhetoric they've said, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
So
Anybody?
I'll go. So don't hate me, y'all, but I will say that Don't shake your head. Don't shake your head. Listen, okay?
No, I'm listening. I'm listening. No judgment. No judgment. No judgment zone.
That when it comes to reparations, that we can all fight together for reparations to each person's government that is not the same. So I know I differ in opinion than you, Jamal, but I feel like the British owe Jamaicans reparations, hands down, 100%, and a whole bunch of other people as well. And the American government owes Black Americans reparations, and whatever government owes specific reparations to those communities. And I think that we can all get on the same agenda, and I could be like, oh hell yeah, F Britain, they need to give my people their reparations. You know what I mean? And I can feel that strongly, and I feel like people that are in Jamaica can feel that strongly for America wanting us to have reparations. I don't think that we necessarily all have to feel like we have to get the same pool of reparations in that the United Nations. I think that the people are more likely to get reparations from each individual country than they would be if we all came together, in my opinion, and said, okay, here you have to give reparations to every single Black person that exists in the world. I don't see that is more. I think that we'll be waiting a much longer time than if we were fighting for the British and Jamaicans, and fighting for America, and fighting in Brazil, and fighting in Peru, and fighting in all the different countries for those specific governments who did horrible to their citizens and their people, or the people who've been in their country and their land and can be traced back for so long. I think that though, and if you're here in America and your ancestors are from Jamaica, you still should be getting those reparations. Like, I don't care if y'all been here since the 50s. If Britain gives Jamaica reparations, your family should be getting those reparations no matter where you happen to be today. So I know that that's not necessarily how you feel about reparations, but
no.
That I agree with adults when it comes to, or whatever they call, when it comes to every individual fighting for their own reparations, because I don't believe that we deserve it, or my Black people deserve it over another group. I think we all deserve it, but that we necessarily might have to fight our own government versus the United Nations coming together and helping us all together. I don't see that personally. Sorry.
So you are not 100% opposed to what I'm saying. No. What I'm saying is that each individual country should demand reparations from those responsible for enslaving them.
Yes.
I agree with you there. And I agree with Ados on that front. The part where I stray away is when we unnecessarily speak negatively on them. Because if you listen to the rhetoric, it's as if it's on the table, and then you have Black people from these other places, the Black immigrants, trying to take from that pool.
Okay.
But it's not even on the table, and no one has even attempted to say that I should get American reparations. So I don't understand where the vitriol comes from against Black immigrants. It's like an argument. It's like what do they call it? A preemptive strike. It's like arguing against somebody before they even have done anything. Like, I haven't heard any Jamaican American immigrant say, I want to be in on reparations if it ever is given to African Americans. Yeah. I've never heard that conversation being had. And so for Ados to come out and like be on attack against people saying that it's not for you, all you have to say is it's for us.
Yes.
You don't have to really go out of your way and say who it's not for. Yeah. That's unnecessary, because that is going to create division. that is going to insult certain people for no reason. And like, that's the part that I disagree with. So in my point on taking it to the UN, it's not about not fighting for it individually. It's about when Jamaica is fighting for reparations against Great Britain, that we as African Americans support them and lend any support that we can give to them in their fight for it. When Haiti is trying to get their reparations from France, we in the diaspora are in full support of their fight for reparations with them. So my thing isn't that, and so I believe that the case to the UN is possible just based on other things, because, you know, the Jews did not get reparations from Germany just on the strength of fighting against Germany. That was UN intervention. Like, that was international intervention. Like, America wasn't just going to give the Japanese internment camp victims reparations just off the strength of, you know, the Japanese fighting against the American government. But they had a home country of Japan that was like, you're not just going to treat our people like that. Even though they are over there, you're going to have to, you know, answer to us as a nation. Because Black people, we don't have a strong enough, powerful nation or military force anywhere in the world that can combat the United States in that way. We have to kind of look for alternative routes. So we can go on the individual country route, and I'm in full support of the individual country route. But I'm saying, in addition to each country fighting for reparations against the country that is responsible for enslaving us, also having, like Kezia mentioned, being ambassadors, having a coalition of an ambassador of African Americans, an ambassador of Jamaicans, an ambassador from Trinidad, an ambassador from Haiti, going to the UN to present the case for reparations. So even if it's divvied out individually, having that coalition go to the UN and say, make sure that these countries do what's right. So it's not like one big pool from everybody. It's still individual, case by case, but it's a collective effort of us supporting each other in that manner, like on that topic. I just don't like the idea of us treating it like only we are owed it and everybody else just needs to sit down and shut up.
I guess how I look at it, this might be a little stereotypical, but how I look at it is like, living in Atlanta, I saw a lot of Mexicans, and how they did it in their communities. They would live together, and then they'll pool their money, and as one of them, you know, gains enough financial freedom to be able to move out, they move that person out, and they keep doing that until all of these people are financially secure and independent. They're still a community, but just that working together. So that's how I look at what you all are saying in regards to reparations. But what I find distracting and absurd and foolish and nonsensical, if that's even a word, is when you have governments who decide to look at reparations a different way, and they're the ones giving out reparations, i.e. Zimbabwe. So you have the president of Zimbabwe, the government of Zimbabwe saying, oh, we want to give out reparations. You're giving it to the wrong people. You need to go and fight for reparations for your people instead of giving reparations to white farmers who that wasn't even their land. They didn't bring anything. They didn't bring any land there. That land was already there. So how are they getting reparations? And I would love to hear your take on it, to see what y'all think about that.
I didn't know that. See, I didn't know that was going.
So I want you to take this because I know that you have to leave soon.
Yeah, okay.
But it's the same thing as what happened in Haiti. In Haiti in the 1800s.
Yeah, this just transpired like a couple of months ago.
Okay.
Yeah, This is an interesting topic. Just to kind of respond to slavery reparations, even though it's still theoretical at the moment. I think the kind of the scale of the task is kind of summed up by, if you look at certain things that are part of our day-to-day. I'm just going to cite a couple of examples before I talk about the Zimbabwean issue. But if you look at the scale of the task in terms of reparations and how they might actually be, functionalized or, worked out, if you look where we are in terms of, I'll just touch on one story, and then, so one story that you can look at in terms of what I was talking about, the importance of story. You can look at, we're kind of in this post-traumatic phase, and there's a lot of healing that has not been done. We are looking at reparations, financially at the moment, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done as well in terms of rehabilitation, mentally, spiritually, all these things. But push that to one side. So the kind of the inequality in storytelling, you will have, for example, talking about characters before I move to institutions. Take two characters from history. King Leopold II of Belgium, who in the 19th century took charge of the Congo. And under his own little project there, it is estimated that up to 14 million lives were lost. And you can look at different sources, and that's the kind of numbers you're looking at. And then you look in the European conflicts, you're looking at around 6 million under Hitler's kind of, activities. So if you ask anyone around the globe who Adolf Hitler is, they can tell you, but if you ask people around the globe who Leopold is, then you will just find for yourself the inequality of storytelling. Institutionally, we have right now an organization. It's not hidden, it's open, it's an international organization. It's called the Commonwealth. This institution exists openly based on the historical idea of what the empire used to be, and then it's been sort of remixed in someone's studio into this, the ex-colonies have come together and they run around the track and they're presented with gold, ironically, by the rulers of the empire. The same minerals that were pillaged in their territories are presented to them after running around the track several times. So these things are interesting to me. So when you look at why it's kind of such a huge task to even contemplate these issues, you just kind of look at what is acceptable at the moment. So yeah, I just thought I'd throw that in response to these ideas. But Zimbabwean question. This is strange to many people. And my take on it is, I have to go back a little bit. What we call the land and what we understand that to be is very different depending who or where you're coming from. So what you look at, in fact, now you can look up, there's a movement called the Territories of Life, where indigenous peoples are refusing the idea of development and insisting on the idea of life territories. So, development is supposed to be this positive word that we are meant to embrace, but with development, a lot of difficult things have come. So when you think of what the land meant and our relationship with the land, so if I look in my own specific case, our ancestors, their relationship with the land was very different from the one we have now. Their relationship with the land was that they understood that the land was a spiritual being And as such, the land was a source for us to keep us physically, nourished, to keep us mentally nourished, to keep us spiritually nourished. And it is also the place where all our ancestors rest. And this role of humans within that, because those ancestors also understood that, the human race is not, in charge of nature and take nature as a backdrop for us to perform whatever we like to do. There was a conscience around the humans are part of the whole of nature, along with other mammals, along with birds, along with places of nature, along with other elements like water, like all this. So this is the kind of philosophy that was there. Now, through colonization, the carving up, this famous phrase, the scramble for Africa, the kind of cutting up land and taking it, this commodification came as a new ideology to suppress what was there before. So what happened? We fought after almost 100 years of colonial rule. We fought not one, but 3 different uprisings, starting in the 1890s. And then eventually in 1980, we celebrated what we called freedom. And at that time, the elders who raised me were not celebrating because they were waiting to see what was going to happen next. Why had we been fighting to get this land back? And by the time I was old enough to understand, I knew that those elders were still worried because they did not see things changing in terms of our attitude towards the land. So this idea that we can deforest, we can, impact on nature for our own progress, so-called, and development, we had completely, within this period, we had completely accepted that idea that the land is a commodity. So when you accept that the land is a commodity, and we're not just stewards of it or keepers of it, when you accept that as an idea that the land is a commodity, through many dealings, many mechanisms in the financial world, in the economic world, you cannot be surprised when you arrive at the point that Zimbabwe has arrived now. Because there are clauses and conditions that lead you to that point. Because we accepted that idea that the land is a commodity for us to, and we felt as we were grabbing it back to ourselves, we continued in the same way that the colonizers had been looking at the land. So this is what I really can say on this issue. So yeah, it's mind-boggling for a lot of people, but it comes from these basic ideas, from what I can observe.
That makes sense.
So I want to remind me, I had read it back in, I believe we first started talking about this around, what was it, May? It was probably no.
It was in this, yeah.
August. It was a couple of months ago.
About in
August or July when I first heard about it. Yeah. And it was like an incredible amount. So Dana, I know you said you hadn't heard about this. So Zimbabwe had President Mugabe, and Mugabe was all about making sure that we rename certain things after the original African name, and he had made a declaration that he was going to take away all of the farmland that the white people who had come to Zimbabwe and colonized and took from the people who lived on that land. These Europeans came, took the land, and kicked people off of it, and he took all of that land back and gave it back to the Africans. Now, this new president has come out and pretty much apologized to the colonizers for taking the land back, and said that they were going to pay them somewhere close to, what was it? It was a crazy number, like 38 billion or something like that in reparations. It's something insane. 3.5 billion, something crazy, right? So Zimbabwe, first of all, is a country that just paid off some debt to the World Bank, still owes a lot of debt. They're going to go into more debt just to satisfy this promissory of reparations for land that was originally stolen. So to pay your thieves for taking away your rightfully owned property and apologize for doing it in the first place. This is what we're talking about here. Right. And your face is the face of everyone that I talked to when we first heard about this.
Wait, is this new president black though?
Yeah.
He's okay. I'm like, you know, because I'm just assuming that he is.
Yes.
Oh, so this is and is he himself from Zimbabwe?
Yeah.
Oh, what?
Yes, but you say, is he himself? That part we don't know. Is he himself? That part is up for question. So like, and I really mean that in the context of like, somebody has to have something on him. Yeah, like, because this makes zero sense. Mm-hmm. Like, what type of dealings is he in? What is being held over him? Because we know, we were just talking about the need for certain people to leave their home country to go to other places for opportunities. Yeah. Zimbabwe is a place on the continent of Africa that is in need of more opportunities for people to succeed. And they need money to make sure that they can sustain the people there. And they are offering up money to give to people who colonize the land. And this is baffling to everybody with logic. Yes. And there have been protests and all types of things. So these are the things that are happening. But just back to even our conversation about reparations, I'm of the mindset more like what Kezia was presenting of Black people not waiting around for reparations. First of all, whatever they give is not going to equal payment for the atrocities that I don't care what they gave. They would have to give us the entire government for it to equal what they took away and the potential of what we could have created during those times. They're never going to give us what is actually owed. So I'd rather just ask them to leave us economically alone. Like, we built Black Wall Street. How about the next time we build a Black Wall Street, the next time we build a Rosewood, the next time we build create a Harlem Renaissance, how about you don't bomb it? How about you don't destroy it? How about just leave us alone and let us do what we do? Let us progress in peace. That's all I ask. Just don't bomb my creation. Like, literally kill my people for being successful. And I believe we'll be okay. Like, we moved past enslavement, and directly after enslavement, Black people became prosperous. Like, in the little 10-year period that Reconstruction existed, while those federal soldiers were still in the South, Black people tripled our wealth, our political influence, our education, and we advanced past so many white people who didn't have nowhere near as much to overcome as we did. And that's why our places like a Black Wall Street got bombed, because of jealousy. Like, leave us alone. I don't want, because one of my fears with reparations, honestly, is that America and all these other places are going to try to deny racism and say, we gave y'all reparations, what y'all complaining about now? I don't want to give them a scapegoat. I want to hold them accountable. I'd much rather just create our own and have them leave us alone.
Yeah.
Like, just don't destroy our creation this time. And that's it. Like, I am completely on board with the fact that these places owe us reparations. Do I believe it's going to happen? No. Do I believe that it is possible? Not to the extent that it's going to be of value to what has been taken. So if people are fighting for reparations, I'm in full support of them. But I'm still going to be on my end, just trying to build up Black people, right? Doing my individual community and economic development in the communities where I can reach, and then expand and build Afrikan Unity Initiative to a place where we can, partner up with other organizations and, just build this thing up unilaterally, unified effort, like Kezia's example of what our Hispanic brothers and sisters do, where they live together, they pool their money, they okay, one person's financially fit, all right, you move out, we'll move somebody else in. This is how we have to build ourselves up. We gave most of these activist groups that are out here advancing, they got the blueprint of how to do activism from Black people.
Yep.
Like, you can talk about the LGBTQIA community, you can talk about Hispanics, you can talk about whatever group you want. They got their blueprint from us. So all we need to do is go back to see what our ancestors were doing, remember the strategic part of it, the strategy. Remember the fact that we weren't isolated. And in the case where we were isolated, I believe we missed one of the biggest opportunities in history. I think it was Kezia, you mentioned social media as like influencers. Think about a world where W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington actually joined forces and used their influence, combined their audiences, and did work together.
Exactly.
They let their pride and their way of thinking get in the way of doing something unheard of. I mean, by themselves, they were two of the most influential people to ever live. If they had just realized that their way of thinking, it wasn't mutually exclusive, it was different, but it wasn't mutually exclusive. It's not like if you support one, you're diametrically opposed to the other. They could definitely coexist. So now we have an opportunity to learn from that mistake, but also learn from the strategies and correct things that our ancestors did and move forward. So my thing is, we need to make sure that we don't dive into and drudge up these threats to our unity. We need to make sure that we are supporting one another. Like Tawana mentioned, be happy to celebrate each other's successes. Not look at it as a threat to you personally. And understand that we all play our own positions. Everybody, like Kezia said, isn't going to be on the front lines of the protests, right? Like Dana said, we need to be more like a fruit salad than a melting pot. You can identify every individual taste. You can identify every individual representation and what they all bring to that dish. Like, that's what we have to be. You have certain people who were very influential from the sidelines, like a Ella Baker. She preferred to be in the background. She's more like a coach. Martin Luther King was more like the star quarterback. He's actually on the field, but if Ella Baker isn't drawing up those plays, then nothing is going on.
Exactly.
Everybody is just as important as the next, right? Everybody is playing their position. So I just want to make sure that we identify threats to unity, we understand what they are, and we move beyond them, and we start to look at what actually is possible. Apartheid, the Jomo Kenyatta, both, and Kwame Nkrumah say that they were influenced to fight for independence in Africa based on being educated at university in the United States and seeing the Black Power movement. They were here during the Black Power movement. They were like, oh, the African Americans, they're fighting for their freedom. I'm going to go home, take that inspiration, and fight for the freedom. That's diaspora influence. African Americans influenced the independence movement on the continent of Africa. Influenced again by Marcus Garvey, who they found, because Marcus Garvey was in the 1930s. The Black Power movement is in the late 60s on into the early 80s. So we're talking about influence, the succession of influence, and how it doesn't really go anywhere. Marcus Garvey never met, Jomo Kenyatta. Marcus Garvey was long dead before Kwame Ture was who he was. But his influence still made that much of a difference. So just those people that we know about, and it's so many people that I'm not even naming because people are unfamiliar with them. But, there's so much more that we can do unified than we could ever do isolated. And as long as we're isolated, they're going to understand that, oh, I can exploit them all day because they don't really care about one another, and they're not going to stand up to us. I can exploit Haiti on Wednesday, I can exploit Nigeria on Friday, and I can exploit African Americans on Saturday, and none of them will know about it because they're not in communication with each other and they don't care. You know what I mean? So we have to change our own narrative and be in control of, how we represent ourselves. I want to give each of you ladies an opportunity to have some closing remarks and let people know how they can find you and support you in any way that you want people to find you and support you. We'll start off with Dana.
This was my first time being on this podcast with you, Jamal. And
awesome.
This was great dialogue. This was we lost one of our teammates in this, but what he had said was that he feels mentally and spiritually nourished right now, and that's exactly what I'm feeling. This was good for the soul, and if I was watching this, I probably would have been talking to the screen with us about everything because it was a good conversation, and the difference in opinions and the similarities in opinions amongst us was just it felt good. So thank you for spending these last 2 hours with me, you guys. I totally appreciated just hearing everyone's stance. Thank you, Jamal, for this platform and hearing what I have to say, little old me. So I totally appreciate it. So that's all I had to say. Just in closing with everything. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kezia.
Yes. So give thanks for this space, this time, everyone who was on this platform, everyone who will be watching this, and if you're lucky enough to be watching this with someone else, definitely share it and all of that on all of the different platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of that. However, I just wanted to add this piece in closing. Remember that definitely one of the threats to our unity is spiritual peace, and we kind of touched on that when we asked ourselves, well, what was he thinking, the president of Zimbabwe? Is he himself? And that is so key that we have to remember to stay connected to source, whatever that means for you, and remember to stay aligned in purpose, because that's how you're going to sustain the momentum of this fight that we have. And it's a great fight. It's a beautiful fight. It's in capoeira, I practice capoeira, we call it jogo, which is play. So it's a dance, right? And it's something that we need to really think about in our hearts and in our minds, and how we're going to show up on this world. I feed people, and food heals you. So what is it that you're feeding people in your influence? Is it just about vanity metrics, or is it bigger and greater than that?
I agree. I mean, the spiritual aspect is very important and very African. Like we,
Very African.
and one of the things I love about studying pre-colonial Africa is that the the very dissection of subjects, like for an example in school here in the West, we take math, science, social studies, history, and then reading, and everything is separated into its own class, and it's almost like there's no crossover into the others. But when you look at the like ancient Kemetic, or even all the way up until like the Timbuktu universities, there was no real division in subject matter. You saw the holistic form of the brain, the holistic body. You need all of those things to play into one another. There is no chemistry without math in it, right? You have those things, and they saw the overlapping of these ideas in these sciences and these arts. They all flowed into one another, and that extended beyond education into your daily life, where you understood the overlapping of interests, the overlapping of expertise, where everybody needed to know how to do certain things, or at least have an appreciation of what other people are experts in. That's another tool to be unified upon. So again, I want to thank you all for being able to join the platform. Tawana had to leave and take care of some family business, so we understand that. But thank you, brother, for your input and the interaction. The reason that we do the Afrikan Diaspora Dialogue is because these dialogues are important. It's not enough to just have people talking at you, right? There are a lot of people who get on platforms and they are, solo acts, and they just talk at people. But in order to be fruitful, to get the unification that we actually seek, there has to be dialogue. There has to be back and forth. There has to be an exchange of different ideas. Dana thought she was opposed to me on the reparations issue until we talked it out, right? And sometimes the miscommunication stops right there at that initial point, because people don't talk it out. And I talk to get understanding of why people think the way that they do. And so we can gain perspective. I don't ever enter a conversation to try to change someone's mind. I seek to get understanding from them and to give them an understanding of my perspective. And we may leave agreeing with each other. We may leave still disagreeing with one another. But I have a better understanding and respect for why you follow what it is that you follow. And, an understanding of where your thought process comes from. That's all I ever ask of anyone, is to fully understand me and allow me to understand what your thought process, the origins of it is, and, the why. And then we can always engage in dialogue. I'm a very firm believer in confrontation. Like, confrontation doesn't mean negativity. It just means facing things head on. Conflict is negative, and conflict derives from misunderstanding. But I'm very confrontational. I'm very direct, and I love to engage in uncomfortable conversations. It's fun to me because you learn. So again, I love you guys. Thank you, all of you who are watching on the live. Everybody who's watching on the replay, thank you for the comments. And please make sure that you like, comment, share, and subscribe to Afrikan Unity Initiative on YouTube. If you're watching on Facebook, please share and, you know, comment in the comment section. All of your interactions, I'll be reading everything and we'll address it on the next episode. We'll be, you know, popping comments up and addressing questions from the previous episodes. We believe in engagement. And this panel is here to really engage with the whole of the African diaspora so we can get perspectives of those even in the audience. So again, we appreciate you guys for watching. I appreciate you, Kezia and Dana, for, you know, taking up these hours of your day and being involved in what we're doing. I love you guys.